Hiya, I'm Bruce Fumi. Now today I'm in Berwick-upon-Tweed. In medieval times, this side of the river was Scotland and that side was England. And I've brought you here for part 2 of my 3-part series on the Second Scottish War of Independence. Now, in the last episode, Robert the Bruce died and Scotland had been invaded from the south. Now, if you haven't seen the first episode and you don't want a spoiler, then click on the white tab above. If you've seen it and you want to know what happens next, then this is the video for you. Now, if you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then you can click on the subscribe button at the bottom right hand side of the screen at any time during this video. Also, don't forget you'll find additional information, books to read and ways to support the channel in the description below. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. Okay, so Scotland was invaded. Normally, the English invaded by sacking Berwick here first, but this time a group of adventurers had sailed to Fife. A large Scottish force lost a humiliating battle against what essentially amounted to a small mercenary force led by Edward Balliol, the son of John Balliol, the former King of Scots. But though Balliol had himself crowned at Scone, he didn't really have the support of the country. Gradually, he retreated closer to the border and then precipitously crossed it. So everything's all right again, eh? Almost. Edward III of England had wanted to invade himself in the first place. The only reason he didn't was that the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton precluded him, and that's why he sent up a private army under John Balliol. He couldn't believe his luck when Balliol got himself crowned. It must have been like winning a scratch card. So there are now 2 kings of Scotland. David II, the son of Robert the Bruce, who had succeeded his dad, and Edward Balliol. He'd just crowned himself at Scone, but he seemed an ineffectual king. A bit like his dad. The thing is that Edward III now had an excuse to invade Scotland at the request of that ineffectual King of Scots. True, Edward's King of Scots had to flee Scotland in the night in his underwear, but Edward sent Balliol back north on the 10th of March 1333 and he crossed the border with his disgruntled, disinherited Scottish knights. And some English magnates in this case. Edward III was splashing out this time. Not only that, but he himself would follow a couple of months later. If you're an English king wanting to take over Scotland, what do? That's right, you lay siege to Berwick. Just like your granddad. Let's face it, I didn't bring you here for the football. Incidentally, can you let me know in the comments section below if you think Berwick should be a Scottish town or an English town? Now, the Scots hadn't been hanging about either. Archibald Douglas was now the Guardian of Scotland and in charge of the Scottish Army. The problem was that the English had positioned and entrenched themselves very well. And even as more and more arrived to swell the Scottish ranks, it was looking like a difficult task. Balliol had arrived in March to start the siege of Berwick. Edward III appeared in May. By June, a combination of siege engines, starvation and the English king's naval blockade out there meant that Berwick was close to falling. To encourage the captain of the town, Edward had the captain's 2 sons executed in front of him outside the town walls. A truce had been agreed on condition that if the town wasn't relieved by Scottish forces entering by the 11th, then it would be handed over to the English. This was Bannockburn in reverse. The English held Halidon Hill here and besieged the town of Berwick. Douglas sent a cavalry force south of the border across the Tweed to approach Berwick over the bridge from Tweedmouth in England. You did, sir! We did it, didn't we? The English said, no, that doesn't count. What? No, you have to relieve the town from the north, from Scotland. What? How come is it that they get to make up the rules all the time? Time was running out. The Scots and Archibald Douglas were in a bit of a bind. Edward had one force besieging the town and another well positioned up here in Halidon Hill. To get to Berwick, Douglas had to go through these English forces, and that meant attacking from the other side of the hill up through a boggy field into withering fire from English longbows. This seemed like a suicidal nightmare, but it had to be done. And we did have more men than them. Advancing Chilterns that had worked so well at Bannockburn 30 years before, but that was when English archers were bogged down and out of the way. They wouldn't be as successful today. Many of the Scots were cut down well before they even reached the crest of this hill, where the fresh English men-at-arms were waiting for them. It was a disaster. Thousands of Scots were killed. Archibald Douglas, the Guardian of Scotland, was amongst them. Edward Balliol was reinstated as the puppet king of Scots. He gave his fealty and allegiance to Edward of England, as he'd promised. He gave Berwick to the English, as he'd promised. But Edward wanted more. Roxburgh, Haddington, Edinburgh, Peebles, Dumfries, Linlithgow all fell into English hands. It was Edward Plantagenet, not Edward Balliol, who ruled the Scots. The 9-year-old David II and his 12-year-old wife Joan were sent to France for safety. Now, looking at the disaster of Halidon Hill, the defeat may seem complete. But that's because you don't understand Scottish people, or Edward Balliol's unpopularity for that matter. Little by little, loyalists took back control of Scotland, pushing Balliol back to the border again. Disputes amongst Balliol's supporters about who was entitled to what led to defections, and slowly but surely he had to retreat back here to Berwick. I sometimes wonder if it was Edward Balliol's character that was weak, or the memory of Robert the Bruce that was still strong. Either way, we were back in control. Unfortunately, that just annoyed Edward of England. He didn't invade again. Aye, he did. Burning? Aye. Looting? Aye. Buying up all the houses in Skye? Aye. What about dodgy southern accents? The lot. Relief came from an ironic source. Back in 1297, Edward Balliol's dad, King John Balliol, had struck an alliance with France. Now, if I don't have a film about that already, it'll be there shortly. The old alliance was the reason that Edward III's granddad Longshanks sacked Berwick and invaded Scotland in the first place. And now it was that treaty struck by Daddy Balliol that would come back to haunt Baby Balliol. Philip VI of France raised an army of 6,000 men and told Edward III that if he didn't agree to the arbitration of the Pope, then Philip would land that army in Scotland. Not only that, but Edward was struggling to make inroads beyond the lowlands of Scotland. I lied about the houses in Skye. He'd burned Aberdeen to the ground, but he'd done some bad stuff as well. The French king provided resources for the Scots loyalists and threatened the English from across the Channel. Ultimately, Edward had to return south to deal with the French threat, and little by little, the Loyalists once more took Scotland back. By winter 1338, Loyalists controlled all of Scotland. In 1341, the now 18-year-old David came back to Scotland. The Bruce dynasty was back on the throne, and Scotland was free of the English yoke forever.
There's another episode.
What do you mean there's another Oh, shit. So Scotland's not free of the English yoke for Okay, so there's one more episode in this series. If you like this one, then watch that and give this one the thumbs up. You can also support the channel, links below. In the meantime, Hami and Dawkins is going to be Lama alive. Cheerio and Drasta.